Hey everyone, and welcome back to Masonzero MTG. Double Masters 2022 is coming soon, and all of the preview cards are here. Now this is a reprint set, so there isn't a lot to say in regards to Cube. Just hopefully you can more easily get some of the rare and expensive cards that often find their way into cubes that are printed in this set. But this isn't a video about those cards. This is a video about the massive amount of cards that were downshifted to common and are now legal in Pauper cubes. Instead of doing a top 5 or a top 10 list, I'm just going to go through all of the downshifts and whether they might find a spot in your cube, or if I think you should just skip them. There are 29 total downshifts to common in this set, which is quite a lot, so strap in for this long list. 10th District Legionnaire is a wonderful downshift that perfectly encapsulates aggressive white-red decks. However, it's most at home if you support a heroic archetype of spells that target your creatures. This isn't too hard in white-red, and the card will really shine as a signpost towards that theme if you support it. Monastery Swiftspear is probably the most significant downshift from Double Masters. It's going to make a splash in both constructed Pauper and Pauper cubes. This card is already played in powered cubes, unpowered cubes, and peasant cubes, so you can bet it's strong enough to see play in Pauper cubes. But that being said, I don't think it's so broken that it will swing games wildly in its favor if that's something you're worried about. Call to the Feast is a good card if you want to support a tokens deck in white-black. The easy comparisons are Captain's Call and You're Confronted by Robbers, which make 3 1/1 soldier tokens. Those cards are not incredibly playable, but Call to the Feast creates tokens with lifelink, making it significantly better. Another comparison for 4 mana is Battle Screech, which makes 2 1/1 flying tokens and can be cast for a second time by just tapping 3 creatures. So there's some competition for this slot, but I think this is a good multicolor signpost card that plays into multiple themes, such as tokens and life gain. I don't think I need to say too much about Experiment 1 because it's clearly going into a lot of Pauper cubes. It historically has been quite good, but there's also a lot of value that can be had out of a 1 mana card that can grow larger and can also regenerate itself. A currently popular Pauper card that is comparable is Young Wolf, which is of course a good card. But if you're looking for more synergy with counters, Experiment 1 is a pretty clear upgrade. Dark Dweller Oracle. Dark Dweller Oracle was downshifted from rare to common. I picked it as a good card for Cube in my review of Core Set 2019 due to its synergy with sacrifice strategies, as well as its useful ability to play cards from the top of your library. I still think it's a solid choice for Pauper cubes, but there have been a lot of other great impulsive draw cards at common since this printing. Reckless Impulse comes to mind, and in many situations you'd probably rather just play that. So this one might be a skip. Fireblade Artist is a sacrifice enabler and payoff all in one, plus it's aggressive. If black-red is all about sacrificing, this seems like a worthwhile card to include in your cube. Spike Jester is a popular pick for this color combination, being a 2 mana 3/1 haste, but the slightly less aggressive stats of Fireblade Artist are more than made up for by the upkeep trigger in my opinion. Especially with Body Dropper from Streets of New Capenna, the aggressive black-red sacrifice theme is looking really nice. Militia Bugler is a little bit of card advantage and card selection for white-based aggro decks, and I think it's a pretty easy card to include in your cube. Compared to a card like Search Party Captain that will always draw a card but may not always cost 3 mana, you get slightly better stats from the Bugler with the possibility that you won't draw any card at all. But if you do get a card, it's going to be a creature. A bit of a trade-off, but definitely worth playing in my opinion. Adding yet another great sacrifice card to the mix is Cartel Aristocrat. This white-black card lets you sacrifice a creature in order to give it protection from a color. This is nice for attacking without being blocked, blocking something large and surviving, or dodging a removal spell. Combined with the previously mentioned Call to the Feast, there's a great token-based sacrifice deck that is much stronger now. Imperious Oligarch is a currently played 2 mana creature in these colors, and even though the Oligarch is pretty good, the Aristocrat is more likely to stay alive and to keep providing value. Bloodwater Entity never enticed me all that much, but at common, it most certainly does. It's 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer with prowess, and it lets you put an instant or sorcery from your graveyard on top of your library. Pauper cubes do sometimes run cards like Izzet Chronarch as a way to get spells back. For 5 mana, this 2/2 puts the card in your hand, while Bloodwater Entity puts it on top of your deck for 2 mana less, while also providing a body that could help end the game. In a spells deck, a flying creature with prowess is a great way to get more value out of your spells, and I think the drawback of where the spell goes is likely worth it still. Izzet Charm is an interesting downshift. It's definitely a card that has proven its worth even in more powerful environments. With the ability to counter a non-creature spell, deal damage to a creature, or filter through cards, I think it's certainly a strong modal card for your Pauper cube. Absolutely no one would question you putting Izzet Charm in your cube, even if it's not Pauper. I do think it's kind of odd that it's the only charm that was downshifted, but at least it's one of the better ones. Jeskai Elder is a small creature with prowess and can loot on combat damage to players. It's a decent card and a decent downshift, but compared to Moon Circuit Hacker or Looter Ilkor, it's hard to say whether it's really worth playing. I'm not particularly excited by this downshift for Pauper. Advanced Stitchwing is a decent 3/4 flying creature for 5, in blue, that has the ability to come back to the battlefield. Certainly that is a powerful effect and a decent high mana cost creature, which is sometimes hard to find, but I wouldn't say it's particularly insane. Honestly, I prefer Wretched Griff for a similar card, but they each have their merits. Now Dregbangler is something to be potentially excited about. It's not a build-around or a signpost, but it does come down as a 3 mana 3/3 with haste, in a pair of colors that don't often get the keyword. It also has Scavenge for 5 mana, which lets you put 3 counters on a creature later on. It's a great graveyard value card that can be aggressive. Gnarlback Rhino is pretty dependent on the rest of your cube for how good it is. I'm not sure how often its ability will trigger, but if you do have a lot of spells that can target it in your cube, then maybe it's worth trying. You might just prefer to play Silverback Shaman or any number of 4 mana 4/4s that have trample plus other, more relevant abilities like Fierce Witchstalker or Bannerhide Krushok. Again though, great if you have a heroic theme. Seeker Squire is an unexciting downshift. I think for the most part you'd just prefer to play Dusk Legion Zealot and draw the card without going through the trouble of exploring. There might be some corner cases, but this is probably a skip. Tuskguard Captain is a +1/+1 counters lord, but is nothing we don't already have access to in Pauper Cube. Crown Ceratok costs 1 mana more, but comes with trample itself. And Pride Malkin gives trample in the same way, but also puts a counter on a creature immediately. It can only do it once, while the Tuskguard Captain can do it repeatedly, but only to itself. Outlast historically hasn't been a fantastic ability. This feels like a miss when you have both of these other options at your disposal. Glowspore Shaman is pretty lame compared to the already available Satyr Wayfinder. Not only is the Satyr a mono green card for effectively the same kind of ability, but it also has a less restrictive casting cost, can put more cards into your graveyard by the time the ability is resolved, and it can get you a land to your hand instead of on top of your library. Glowspore Shaman does have some redeeming qualities, including its aggressive 3/1 body and the ability to get a land that was already in your graveyard, instead of just one from the top 4 cards of your deck. I think in most cases this card is a miss though. Relief Captain isn't the most exciting card, but it's not terrible either. When it enters, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 3 different other creatures. The biggest downside is, of course, it's wasted if you don't have 3 other creatures. It can't even put the counters on itself. Compare this to something like Rock's Veteran, which buffs up your creatures every time it attacks, or even cards like Amprin Tactician that give a temporary buff to everything, and it doesn't seem nearly as exciting. This criticism goes out the window if you have a counters theme, in which case this card is awesome, especially if you're running the previously mentioned Crown Ceratok or Pride Malkin. Relief Captain can basically grant 3 of your creatures trample along the way. Carrier Thrall is an okay sacrifice target, leaving behind a 1/1 that can sacrifice to make a mana. But in most cases, I think you'd prefer just to run Doom Dissenter or Sultai Emissary, which each leave behind a 2/2 when they die. Unless there's a special corner case for you, I would say skip this card. I'm not sure if there are really any equivalents to Liliana's Elite that are currently being played in Pauper Cubes, but it seems like an okay inclusion if you have decks that put creatures into graveyards. Overall, I'm not too excited about it, but it's not a bad card. Yeah, sure, Vampire Sovereign is fine. It's a flying miniature Grey Merchant of Asphodel, I guess. I think it shines if you're looking for a flying black creature near the high end of the curve, and maybe have life gain synergies, but I wouldn't say this card is overwhelmingly good. Lava Coil is an okay removal spell, and when it was somewhat recently in Standard, it was one of the best red removal cards around. But compared to other cards that are legal in Pauper, it's just not exciting. 2 mana for 4 damage and exiling the creature at sorcery speed feels less interesting next to just Lightning Bolt, or Fire Prophecy, or even Flame Slash. There are situations where the exiling could matter, so if you have a lot of graveyard synergies in your cube, it's worth considering over another burn spell, but I'm not really too excited about it otherwise. Living Lightning has a pretty good comparison with Ardent Elementalist. Living Lightning comes with better stats, but only returns a spell when it dies, whereas the Ardent Elementalist returns a spell immediately. I think in general we'd rather have more control of when we get the spell back, even if it means weaker stats, so this is likely a skip. I think that Pirate's Pillage is a pretty cool downshift, but that's because I like treasures. But when we have access to Faithless Looting and Thrill of Possibility, it's hard to recommend it for Cube. The extra mana is probably less useful than being able to filter through your cards sooner in the game, so I'm going to say this is likely a skip unless you want to support artifact synergies. Purphoros' Emissary is not exciting to me. Bestow cards don't usually make the cut in Pauper cubes as far as I can see, and this is not likely to be different. The only exception is if you happen to be supporting a red Auras archetype, but that seems unlikely. Might of Old Krosa is one of many cards that can conditionally give +4/+4 for only 1 mana, but this one asks to be cast at sorcery speed. I think it's okay, but when cards like Giant Growth and Vines of Vastwood compete for this slot, I think it'd be difficult to find a spot for this card. But I don't think anyone would fault you for trying it out instead of one of those long-time staples. Who knows, maybe it's better than I think. Webweaver Changeling is an okay payoff for graveyard decks that can block a lot of damage and help you gain life. The fact that it has Changeling doesn't really have anything to do with its abilities, but if you do happen to have tribal elements in your cube, this could make the cut. Otherwise, Nessian Asp is the more aggressive version. It's also a 5-drop with reach, but can grow bigger with an additional mana investment rather than gaining life if you drafted a self-mill deck. Chronicler of Heroes is definitely a magic card. Okay, I'm not super excited about it, but maybe it makes the cut in a cube that has a counters theme. But it only draws 1 card, maybe, and it kinda just feels like Llanowar Visionary for the same amount of mana would be preferred if you really want a card that replaces itself. Liev's Sky Knight probably would have been cool at Common a couple years ago, but now we have Frost Trickster. Now Detain is different than tapping, as it also turns off activated abilities and outright prevents attacking and blocking in case of untap effects. It could be an interesting consideration for your blue-white cards, especially in comparison to a card like Celestial Regulator. I just don't think it's the most exciting ability of all time. So, which of these common downshifts are you excited about? Let me know down in the comments. I think there are a lot of really cool options here. Most of them are probably at least worth testing, and I'm already sifting through my collection of cards and adding a lot of them to my cube. Well, until the next video, happy cubing.